Hi. At the end of February, I asked people to write in their questions and comments, and I'm Michael Campbell, the founder of Glossika, and I'm here to answer some of those questions that have come in. And this comes from Kimberly, and she says, "Hi Michael, is it possible to learn reading by just sight reading Asian languages, or languages like Bengali, Hebrew, Arabic, and so on? I read an old book about language learning, and the author mentions it can be done, although he might be talking about reading based on Roman characters. Below is an excerpt of what the author says. The old method was to teach a child to recognize all the letters and then to identify words by means of the letters with which they were spelled. It has been found, however, that a child can recognize the entire word more easily than he can recognize a single letter in it. And it is not at all uncommon for children to learn to read before having mastered their ABCs. The ability to spell a word is not essential to the proper use of that word in speaking, nor is it necessary for reading comprehension. It really becomes essential only when writing is begun. The point is in keeping with modern theories regarding the teaching of reading and spelling to the child in the lower grades. The old alphabet method has been practically abandoned, and it is not uncommon now for a child to finish the first grade without knowing his letters. A similar thing is entirely possible in foreign language study, and in fact, many of the authorities recommend it." Well, I have a few kind of personal anecdotes about this, because I've known some friends who have children, at least here in Taiwan, where we live. And what I've noticed is that a lot of children, if they're curious enough and they ask enough questions when they're young, before the age of kindergarten, they actually can start going to kindergarten already recognizing perhaps hundreds of Chinese characters. And you might think, well, the first 100 characters sounds like a really hard thing to accomplish. But once you get to a certain point, they start to snowball. They start to accumulate faster and faster. And then there's a kind of a point of absorption where, man, it's really a lot of work to kind of memorize any more of these, because it's kind of beyond your common knowledge. At least for a child, there's a certain number of things they know and they can communicate about. And so beyond that, they have to go to school and learn more. And so I think the same is true in your own studies when you were a child. At some point you had to start memorizing vocabulary at school. But the thing is, how does a child learn how to read Chinese characters without being taught? They're not being taught the actual components of the character, the radicals of the character. They don't even recognize these. They just look at the whole thing and they recognize it as a word. If you see "canteen" written above a storefront, oh, that's a restaurant. And so you see those two characters put together, and you just know, two characters over there says "inhang," and oh, that's a bank. Because you see them so commonly in your everyday life. And so having that environment helps. But I think that for ancient languages, it's funny you mentioned Bengali, because I think, well, okay, so with a language like Arabic, you actually have the word shapes. They actually form patterns which can tell you the conjugations of the words. So having an extra, an a or an u in a certain place in that word can actually tell you the conjugation. But then you look at the anchors in the word and you know what root it is. And then with Bengali, I think I was looking at the alphabet at one point, and it seems like Bengali has maybe 150 to 200 weird combination of characters that can be like compounded and they change shape. And so to memorize every single one of those combinations is actually really tricky. And I think you'd be hard pressed to actually, to prepare for a test where you actually had to write out every single combination perfectly. Yeah, so writing a language is really, really tricky. And so with a language like Bengali, there's already a lot of letters, and then you have like 100 or more combinations when you put them together. That can be a really hard language to learn how to read it and write. So if you see the word as a whole concept, I believe it is entirely much easier. The child already speaks the language, and they say, well, that word says car, that word says dog or something, and they see all of those things, and they kind of remember that shape. And remember, when a child is young, they're learning new things all the time. Every time you meet a new person, you have to recognize their face. So the next time you meet them, maybe you meet them a week later or a month later, you have to remember their face represents a certain sound, which is their name, which applies to their face. So if you think about how hard is it to learn Chinese characters or the Bengali letters or words, the thing is that every single word is like a face. It's like a new name that you have to learn. And so if you consider, if you're learning English or if you're learning German, it's the same thing. It's just like learning new faces. And so every new word that you learn has a certain sound associated with it. It just makes it easier for us to write the word if we know there's 26 letters that we can break the word down into its basic components and then write it out. And since you already speak the language, if the language is written phonetically, then you just have to pronounce it really slowly and then you can write it out. But that's not true for some languages, like Chinese or Japanese. So you have to you get all these jumbled shapes and they represent a certain meaning. But because of the shapes look quite individual, then it's quite easy to remember a large quantity of them. If there's some really weird writing systems out there in the world, one just to give you kind of blow your mind here. There's one called Tangut. And Tangut, all the characters look quite similar. They only have about 4 or 5 different kinds of strokes, but they look like Chinese characters. But the average character has 12 strokes. So there is no simple looking Tangut character in the whole language. I think the simplest character already has like 5 or 6 strokes. The simplest Chinese character, on the other hand, has 1 stroke. It's the number 1 itself. And so, there are some languages out there, and I've tried to learn these languages, learn those writing systems, and without much luck, they're really hard. So I'm actually looking for a way, if we could actually create a system on Glossika where, together with the space repetition system, could we actually create a system where we could teach you all of the Tangut characters in a relatively short period of time and you'd actually still remember them. So I'm kind of working on tough problems like that. If we can solve that problem, we can solve teaching people Chinese characters in a short period of time, Arabic and Bengali and all the others. That would be a really interesting solution. So there's a lot of fun things that we're working on in the laboratory and trying to figure out. But on the other hand, ancient languages like Sanskrit, Avestan or Pali, and Pali is written in a lot of different languages, Greek, ancient Greek and ancient Hebrew, and then Latin, all of these different languages from the past. Maybe there is a chance for bringing them back and putting them out there on the platforms and giving people the chance to actually learn how to read these languages, Egyptian hieroglyphs as well, And maybe at some point we'll actually find somebody like a professor who knows actually how to pronounce these languages somewhat fairly well and be able to provide recordings for sentences and things like that. So that's also a possibility and something really interesting to look forward to. Anyway, thank you for your questions. If you have any more, be sure to send them in and I'll read them over and then make a response. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Michael Campbell, founder of Glossika. If you like this video, be sure to hit like, comment below, and don't forget to subscribe.